Hey everyone, it's Alexander, the real Mr. Robinson. So the best and worst of lists are done for 2019, but we are now in 2020, a new decade, which means there's a whole previous decade of movies that we need to look back on. This is the first time a lot of critics on YouTube, including myself, are getting the chance to do the best and worst of the decades. So within the tradition of my own channel, we're gonna kick things off with what I think are the 10 worst movies of the last decade. Now this list was actually very difficult to come up with, and so was the best of list. And one of the reasons why it was so difficult was because that's 10 years of looking back at the worst movies imaginable. So obviously there are some dishonorable mentions, and I'm not going to even determine what the biggest disappointment of the decade was because that would take forever. It's just going to end up being a giant juggling act of what I think was the most disappointing movie of the last decade. So here are some dishonorable mentions. Pixels, a movie with a great premise based off a really interesting short film that was turned into a horrible Adam Sandler comedy. The Twilight Saga, Breaking Dawn Part 1. There were 3 Twilight movies that came out in the last decade. Eclipse was bad, but it had its moments to it. Breaking Dawn Part 1 was just awful all around, and the reason this book was split into 2 movies is solely for the money. I never saw Part 2. This, for me, is where the Twilight Saga ends because it's so terrible. The Lion King remake. Go watch my worst of 2019 list because I'm not going to go into details here. Holmes and Watson. I gave this the benefit of the doubt when I saw the trailer, but once I actually saw the movie, I was like, oh shit, this is... wow. Bucky Larson, Born to be a Star. Most of the time, whenever a Happy Madison movie comes out that doesn't star Adam Sandler, it's mostly infinitely worse than the ones that actually star him. And this right here is probably the most disgusting movie that they've ever made. Skyline. From the directors of one of my most hated movies of all time, Aliens vs. Predator Requiem. In comparison to that movie, this is a masterpiece, but it is still pretty terrible. Assassin's Creed. You have Academy Award nominee Michael Fassbender, Academy Award winner Marion Cotillard, and this ends up being one of the worst video game adaptations out there. The Mummy. Rather than making this an actual horror movie, they decided to make it a Tom Cruise action movie and the supposed start of the Dark Universe. Rest in peace, Dark Universe. You didn't last long. Green Lantern. A lot of people will say that this is the worst comic book movie, or at least one of the worst comic book movies of the last decade. But I just didn't see it in theaters, and much like with Suicide Squad, I didn't expect much from it going in, so I can't say I was sorely disappointed, but it is definitely dog shit. Transformers: Dark of the Moon. This is hands down the best Michael Bay directed Transformers movie out there, and yet it's still terrible. It is absolutely awful. After Earth. If there was ever one director that could easily suck out all the charisma from Will Smith, it would be M. Night Shyamalan, because, wow, this movie felt like more of an afterthought than anything. The Godzilla anime trilogy. I lump all of these together because they all form one story, and while they have interesting ideas and a unique premise, they do nothing with it. The best way to sum up this trilogy is wasted potential. Birdemic. I don't think this needs an explanation whatsoever. The Identical. This is one of those movies that was made for a drinking game just because of how amateurish it's made. And you can't even believe this is a movie that has Ray Liotta, Ashley Judd, and Seth Green in it. Like, how in the world did they get these people into this movie here? 9 Lives. Kevin Spacey as a talking cat. I think that's all you need to know. And then the last honorable mention is Action Point, a movie that tries to attempt to be a Jackass-type movie, but is just horrible. It's not clever in the way Jackass is, which that's a weird thing to say, but it's just awful. Now let's actually get into what my 10 picks for the worst of the decade are. And without further ado, let's hop into number 10. The Snowman. When this trailer came out, it looked really cool, and it looked like it could be a really awesome thriller with Michael Fassbender, but what we got instead was a jumbled, confusing, and practically incomplete mess of a movie. It's common knowledge that the production schedule on this movie was way too tight, and there was about 15% of the script that the director wasn't allowed to shoot just because of a time crunch. That's something I don't blame the director on at all, but if he had been able to shoot that last 15%, would that fix having to redub over Val Kilmer with a voice that sounds nothing like his? Would that be able to fix the terrible motivation that the villain has? Would that be able to fix the horrible, laughable climax? And above all else, would that be able to fix the fact that throughout this entire movie, everyone refers to the main character's name as Harry Hole? No, I don't think so. And it's a damn shame that this movie is as bad as it is because it had so much potential going for it, but they just ruined it. It's one of those movies that doesn't fall into the category of it's so bad it's good. It falls into the category of it's so bad you have to see it to believe it. And in my opinion, The Snowman lives up to that expectation. Number 9. Batman vs. Superman, Dawn of Justice. Now let's talk about the good first of all. Ben Affleck makes a great looking Batman. The action scene in the warehouse is absolutely spectacular. The score by Hans Zimmer and Junkie XL can be good in spots. And Wonder Woman is the best part of the movie. Everything else is absolute horseshit. The plot makes no damn sense whatsoever. Jesse Eisenberg as Lex Luthor was poor miscasting. And before any of you say, oh, he's supposed to be Lex Luthor Jr., I know that. But for the sake of this series, he is our Lex Luthor, and he is horrible. Henry Cavill as Superman is so boring and so dull. Never once does he smile. And this interpretation of Superman is just atrocious, at least in this movie. With Man of Steel, he was good in spots, but this is the movie that clearly shows that Zack Snyder does not care for Superman whatsoever. And above all that, throwing in Doomsday in the second movie of your cinematic universe was a horrible mistake. The entire climax itself is an ugly mess, and even though Wonder Woman is the best part of the movie, she has no reason to be in it at all. The nightmare sequences, the video files that show each of the other Justice League members, and anything that tries to set up Justice League is shoehorned in. I know a lot of people love this movie. A lot of people that I respect dig this movie a lot. For me, this is a turd on a stick, and I feel like ever since Zack Snyder did Watchmen, he really got this idea in his head that I need to make intellectual comic book movies, and no, it's the equivalent of Michael Bay trying to make Shakespeare. It's just an epic miscalculation on every level. It is an ugly movie. I know a lot of people would put Justice League on their worst of the decade list, but this movie is even worse in my opinion, just because it lacks joy. And the only joy that anyone can get out of this movie is unintentionally funny moments like Martha. Why did you say that name? Number 8. 50 Shades of Grey. What could possibly be worse than Twilight itself? Well, how about Twilight fanfiction disguised as an erotic novel? This movie is all kinds of terrible. Whether it has moments that are just absolutely hilarious in how bad it is, like naming your character Anastasia Steele, which is totally a porn name, the horrible acting from both Dakota Johnson and Jamie Dornan, the fact that whenever Christian Grey is in this movie, he is one John Carpenter theme away from being a slasher villain. Twilight was terrible, sure, but that was in the last decade. Everyone's over it. And I think a lot of people who actually liked Twilight are looking back at it now and going, ooh, what was I thinking? But this is even worse because it's trying to appeal to an R-rated crowd, and it just comes across as more disturbing. Like, it's horrible. I never saw any of the sequels, so those are 2 bullets I probably dodged, but this one right here, terrible. Number 7. The Emoji Movie. Now, when I did my list of the worst movies of 2017, I put The Snowman over The Emoji Movie, but I've really had time to think about this, and at the very least, The Snowman has moments that are just so bad they're funny. With The Emoji Movie, however, it just has nothing but a corporate stamp all over it. It's like this movie was created by a bunch of executives that wanted to cash in on the biggest trends happening, and that's it. There's no clever story at all. There's no memorable characters. There's only annoying characters, especially in the form of James Corden's high five. The script makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. It's just a very, very uninspired movie that rips off other better animated movies like Wreck-It Ralph and Inside Out, and even Toy Story. In a way, I can never say that I was angry at this movie, but it probably left me the most depressed out of most of the movies on this list that you're gonna see. Batman vs. Superman did make me angry at points, but at least I pointed out some good moments. The Emoji Movie has none of that, so that's why it's lower. Number 6. The Last Airbender. This is a movie that I specifically watched yesterday for the first time before I did this list, because everyone has said you can't do a worst of the decade list until you see The Last Airbender. And I did, and holy crap, this is crap. I never watched the show when it aired. I watched it on DVD for the first time after I got out of college, and I think it's a brilliant show. It's imaginative, it's exciting, it's got some great characters. It's just a fantastic series all around. And M. Night Shyamalan made a movie that is literally none of those. The acting is on a level of atrocious that I don't think I've seen in a long time. Maybe the worst acting of the last decade. Especially from Jackson Rathbone as Sokka, Nicola Peltz as Katara, and Noah Ringer as Aang, or as this movie says, Ong. And that's another thing with this movie. Nobody cared at all to the point where they are mispronouncing names like Ong, they say Avatar as Avatar. And it's not like the show even said both names 80 freaking times throughout 3 seasons. The action scenes are boring, the special effects are terrible. The movie ends with a cliffhanger to a sequel that never got made, which, for those of you who want to see a sequel, watch the show. Just do that. The show is brilliant. This movie is horrible, and everything that everyone said about this movie when it first came out 10 years ago is not an exaggeration. This is horrible. Number 5. Cats, which topped my list for the worst movies of 2019. I already talked about this movie enough and most recently, but just as a refresher, the reason I feel like this is one of the worst movies of the decade comes down to several factors. A, the designs of the characters look absolutely hideous. B, the story is just nonsensical, which that comes from the play. C, the play itself is awful, and whoever greenlit this movie thinking that it was going to be an Oscar movie is long fired, I imagine. If not, then they are probably looking foolish. And when I looked up the making of this movie even further after doing my review and my worst of list, it really does confirm that they did everything wrong when it comes to a motion capture performance, because none of the actors are wearing those rigs that are supposed to record your facial expressions or those motion capture bodysuits, and it just comes across as so amateurish. And the fact that this movie cost nearly $100 million, you're just like, where did that money go? How did this get approved? How did this go horribly wrong? In my review for this movie, I said, well, if you're a super fan of Cats, then nothing I say is going to affect your opinion. But I recently got a comment from somebody that proves that statement wrong, because this is a movie that's so terrible that even super fans of Cats are turning on it. Let me actually read the comment right here. I know I'm just stopping the review dead, but I gotta read this to you guys. And this comes from Jellicle Cat, cat spelled with a K. I am one of those super fans. I've seen the DVD well over 700 times. I've seen the stage play about 15 times. I used to own my own Cats website until Yahoo closed down everything but their main page and emails. When I was still celebrating Halloween, I'd always dress up like a cat and on and on. But his film now makes me ashamed to say I'm a fan at all. Damn Weber for destroying such a brilliant show. It was bad enough to see the changes made to the revival in 2016, and now this movie has pushed me over the edge. I've gotten a lot of hell for saying this is one of the Cats groups that I moderate on Facebook, but I sincerely hope this thing kills the fandom, because I'm sick to bloody death of those newbies coming in bathing on and on and on about how wonderful this thing is, because it's not. It's a nightmare. I gotta say, Jellicle Cats, I am so sorry that this movie ruined your love of Cats. Take it from somebody who has had a lot of disappointment come their way when it comes to things that they love. Just focus on the stuff that you love. Don't focus on the terrible stuff. You can always find some good aspects in it, but this right here, the 2019 film version of Cats, is truly horrible. Number 4. Fantastic Four, or Fan4stick. If you were disappointed or mad that I put Batman vs. Superman in my worst of the decade list, then I hope I redeemed myself by saying that this is the worst comic book movie of the last decade. Let me first say this, that Fox was on a roll at this point. They had done X-Men First Class, they had done X-Men Days of Future Past. It really seems like they got back into the groove of making great comic book movies again, especially after X-Men 3, X-Men Origins Wolverine, and the 2 Tim Story Fantastic Four movies. And somehow this movie, Josh Trank's Fantastic Four, makes you look at the Tim Story movies and go, well, I guess they weren't all that bad. Because this movie is anything but a Fantastic Four movie. It's trying to be a David Cronenberg body horror movie, which a lot of people liked. I'm not one of those people because it's not in spirit with this team. Most of the casting doesn't work at all, especially Miles Teller as Reed Richards and Jamie Bell as Ben Grimm. Michael B. Jordan was one of the casting that I actually was fond of because it doesn't matter if Johnny Storm is black. But everything else about this movie is just terribly done. It's boring, it's stupid, the dialogue in the script is horrible. Toby Kebbell as Dr. Doom is one of the worst comic book villains ever, especially considering that Doctor Doom himself is one of the greatest Marvel villains ever created. The climax is nonsensical. It's so obvious to tell what was originally filmed versus the reshoots just because of Kate Mara's wig. This was just an epic failure on all accounts. I'm so glad that the Fantastic Four are back with Marvel Studios because it's about time that somebody did this family justice. Even if an MCU Fantastic Four movie comes out and is just okay, it'll still be leagues better than this turd right here. Number 3. Transformers: Age of Extinction. Now before anyone asks, because I know somebody will, I still have not seen Transformers: The Last Knight. I cannot imagine that it's worse than this movie here. You all know I hate Transformers: Revenge of the Fallen, but that was 2 decades ago. That was from the 2000s. This here is the second worst movie of the franchise. One of the main reasons for that is that it is almost 3 hours long. It's pushing the 2 hour and 40-minute mark, and it's a Transformers movie with nothing to say at all. Mark Wahlberg replaces Shia LaBeouf in this movie as an inventor from Texas with a Boston accent, which, as a Texan, I'm insulted by. And this movie even has Katara herself, Nicola Peltz, in a very awkward scene where she plays Mark Wahlberg's 17-year-old daughter, and he has a lecture towards her about how her shorts are just way too short, while the camera is focused on her ass. Like, I know she was 19 when she made this movie, but since the character is supposed to be 17, that is just bordering on pedophilia right there. And then as for the Transformers themselves, they all look terrible. The special effects in this movie are atrocious, especially with the Transformers that can pixelate rather than actually transform. Optimus Prime here is no longer the stoic and well-respected leader of the Autobots. He is a murderous psychopath. The Dinobots are absolutely worthless. It's everything that's wrong with the previous Transformers movies, except there isn't one scene in this movie that you can pinpoint and say it was enjoyable. The reason this is on the worst of list over Dark of the Moon is because the third act of Dark of the Moon is admittedly very cool, and the special effects are better. It's still a horrible movie, but at least it's not as terrible and as shameless and as long as Transformers: Age of Extinction. Number 2. Movie 43. One of the worst and most offensive comedies of the last decade. This movie has a laundry list of actors that are not only A-list, but are actors that have either been nominated for or have won an Academy Award. I'll just go down the list right now. Elizabeth Banks, Kristen Bell, Halle Berry, Leslie Bibb, Kate Bosworth, Gerard Butler, Dennis Quaid, Josh Duhamel, Anna Faris, Richard Gere, Terrence Howard, Hugh Jackman, Johnny Knoxville, Justin Long, Seth MacFarlane, Stephen Merchant, Christopher Mintz-Plasse, Chloe Grace Moretz, Chris Pratt, Liev Schreiber, Sean William Scott, Emma Stone, Jason Sudeikis, Uma Thurman, Naomi Watts, Kate Winslet, What? And then you have several directors that have directed segments in this movie, like Peter Farley, Elizabeth Banks, Brett Ratner, James Gunn, Bob Odenkirk? Bob Odenkirk directed one of these skits? Like, it's truly baffling. Not just the amount of actors that are in this movie, not only the insane amount of directors either, but it's not clever, it's a bunch of gross out humor, it's disgusting, it's offensive, it's just... this movie... I gotta move on. This is only the second worst movie of the last decade. I'm about to snap, so it's just horrible on all accounts. Let me get my cool back. Let me just calm down. I need a drink, goddammit, because these movies are really making me mad. Okay. We're at the last one, luckily. So what could possibly be even worse than movie 43? Well, I present to you number 1, Jack and Jill. Hands down, the worst movie that I think Adam Sandler has done in the last decade, and tied with 8 Crazy Nights as the worst movie he's ever done, period. This here, for me, is the worst movie of the last decade for a couple reasons. For one, it's a concept that is so lazy and so tired that South Park did a parody of it before the trailer even came out. It's Adam Sandler playing not only the main character, but his twin sister. The next thing is that the jokes are absolutely cringeworthy and horrific. There's nothing here that actually made me laugh. And 3, which is probably the biggest crime that this movie has ever committed, bringing in Al Pacino. I mean, it's bad enough that he's in it at all, but to have him play himself and throughout the entire movie just swooning over Adam Sandler's Jill, it's embarrassing. I don't know what Adam Sandler did to get Al Pacino to be in this movie, but this is hands down probably the most embarrassing thing Al Pacino has done in his career, which makes me want to say thank you to Quentin Tarantino and Martin Scorsese for bringing him on to Once Upon a Time in Hollywood and The Irishman, because he really needed those movies, especially The Irishman. Honestly, I am amazed that I even saw this movie from beginning to end, because it's so atrocious. And it just goes down so many cliches. And this was the biggest eye-opener to Adam Sandler's movies back when he was making them in theaters, to where all of them were just literally a vacation that the studio paid for. It's baffling, and for all those reasons, that's why I say Jack and Jill is the worst movie of the last decade. So there you go. Those are my picks for the 10 worst movies of the last decade. Thinking about all those movies just made me exhausted, but now that I've got the shit out of the way, there's nowhere to go but up. Check back here in a couple days where I'll be going over my list of not just the 10 best, not even the 20 best, but the top 30 best movies of the last decade, because there were so many great movies in the last decade that I could not narrow it down to 10. So that's a list that I'm excited to talk about. But now I want to know what you guys think about this list. Do you agree with my picks? Do you disagree with my picks? What are the 10 worst movies of the last decade in your opinion? Whatever the case may be, let me know in the comments below. And until next time, I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, give this video a like, leave a comment, support my Patreon page, follow me on social media. And until then, this is the Real Mr. Robinson telling you there's only one.